Hi y'all, I'm Amber, welcome back to Cat's Reads, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my book, Windup. I do remember talking about the 6 books that I planned to read from my own library, but I did in the middle of reading those books go and borrow some books from the library, so you'll be hearing my thoughts on those books, but I already returned them to the library, so you won't be able to see the physical book here. I should have known better than to borrow books while I was reading my own books and trying to go back and forth. It's too much pressure. I need to be able just to focus on either the library books or my own books and go back and forth between them like I was doing at the beginning. But I got tempted, I gave in, and I knew better. I've tried this before and it never works. So we're going back to my original format. That being said, let's just begin with the first book, which was Agnes Gray by Anne Bronte. This is about, of course, Agnes Gray, who decides to become a governess when her family hits on hard times financially, and she is pretty naive. She lives a protected and pampered life, and in becoming a governess, she doesn't realize what happens, what life is like as a governess, especially during those times, and how isolated it is. This is, of course, a reread for me, and in reading it the second time, it was more frustrating for me. I think I was just being kind to it, extra lenient, because it was her first novel. It's one of the Bronte sisters, and I wanted to be nice, so I was kinder in my review, but it was much more frustrating to read it now because I was really looking at it analytically and trying to decide if this was going to be a book that I kept on my shelves forever. And in doing so, I realized this time that she tells things and explains things more than shows what's happening. And in the first 4 chapters, that was fine because those were the hardest chapters to read, and I just kind of wanted to have like that distance between what was happening and telling it instead of showing there is. So I was fine with that. But then when we get past those chapters and things start getting better, that telling instead of showing got frustrating, especially when she'd be like, oh, this and this and this, but I'm not going to bore you with the details. That really got frustrating, especially because those details were the details I really wanted, and I wanted to know more about those things. And the last thing I want to mention here is how much religious preaching there was. And like I said, the first time I was being nice about it, and I didn't really notice how preachy it was, but in the second time, it was very preachy. I started feeling like I was in church listening to a sermon. I don't mind when a character is religious. I don't mind when that's part of their character, but when it becomes the point where the author is preaching at you, and you can totally tell when they are, it becomes a tedious bit of work to try to get through. So the first time I gave this 3 stars, and now I have decided to give it only 2 stars, and I will definitely be giving this away. That I picked up is Agnes Gray by Margaret Atwood. This is about Grace Marks, who's been convicted of murder, or rather her involvement in the murder. It's not really clear if she actually committed the murder or if she was just an accomplice, but she's been convicted and is living a life sentence in prison for it. She also claims to have no memory of these murders. A up-and-coming expert in the burgeoning field of mental illness, Dr. Simon Jordan, is engaged by a group of reformers and spiritualists who seek a pardon for Grace. Like I've said many times before, I love Margaret Atwood's writing. She has a way with words, and she knows how to create very unique, intriguing characters that really come to life through her words. But I've always struggled with her stories. Either they're not really as good as her writing, or they kind of go over my head. This one I actually enjoyed a whole lot better. I just think that she could have done without Simon's perspective. I thought when I first saw his perspective that he was going to add something to Grace's story, to her loss of memory, but instead he comes off to be like this crazy, disturbing person. Like, his thoughts are really off. Like, it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable for me to read his thoughts because of the way he viewed women and the way he thought of them and the way he would imagine them. It was just really disturbing to me, and nobody that I've read reviews from has ever actually mentioned his perspective or anything negative about it, but I just don't think that his perspective added anything to the overall story. This is supposed to be about Grace and about her lack of memory and what happened with the murders of her boss and his housekeeper, and instead his perspective is really all about him, and he doesn't add anything to her case, and so it just was really annoying and tedious to work through. But Grace was brilliant. I loved Grace. I felt for her, and I really liked reading her perspective. What was also very interesting is that her perspective was written almost in a stream of consciousness style. It wasn't really stream of consciousness in the way that Virginia Woolf does it, but you were in her mind, you were in her thoughts, and I really liked that because it helped to kind of understand where Grace herself was coming from more. And she seemed more sane than Dr. Simon Jordan, which is bizarre to me. The other thing that I will mention here is that if you're into psychology, if you've read about psychology at all, you will know pretty early on what Grace's amnesia means. I knew right off the bat what it meant, what it was, and I do think that we're not supposed to know. I feel like the whole book is building up and on what does her amnesia mean? Is it really amnesia? Did she really block out her memory? Could it be something else? And it all builds up to that big reveal. And so for me, when that revelation came, I wasn't surprised, nor was it really all that big exciting moment for me. Just go into the book with that in mind. I didn't think it took anything away from me overall. Grace's story was still interesting. It kept me hooked from beginning to end, but like I said before, I did think Simon's perspective was necessary, nor did I really want his perspective, especially because it didn't add anything. Overall, enjoyed her writing, like always. Enjoyed the story. I felt like the story was her strongest of the ones I've read so far. So in the end, I had to give Agnes Gray 3 stars. It would have gotten 4 to 5 stars if it hadn't been for Simon's perspective. Then I read The Accidental by Ali Smith. This is about a family who goes on vacation. They're living in their summer home, I guess, and this woman named Amber arrives at their doorstep, and each of the family members has this assumption of who she is and the connection that she possibly has to the family, and it's about each family's relationship with her and the effect that she has on this family's life and all of that. I did mess this book pretty quickly because I didn't like her writing style. I felt like it was very messy. I get that stream of consciousness, but she did it in such a way that it was so messy and chaotic. I also didn't like how she made Amber into this magical being almost. Like, I don't know how to explain it. It just, she was supposed to be real. She's supposed to be a human being. Just, don't try to elevate her higher than what she is. And I just didn't really care for where she was taking the story. It just annoyed me. Also, none of the characters were really that likable, nor could I understand them either. So I didn't give Accidental a rating because I didn't finish it, but in the end, because I did give it a good try, I've given it 1 star. The book that I read was also a library book, and that was Above All Things, and I'll put the author's name here because I do not have it here and I don't remember what their name is. This is about a couple who's been married for a while. They have 2 kids, I believe, and the husband has gone several times to Everest, has tried to climb it to the very top and hasn't succeeded, and he has promised his wife that he will not do it again. But when he's invited to what are you doing? But when he's invited to go one more time, he decides that he has to do it. He has to try at least one more time and hopefully to succeed. Also based on real people. It's a fictionalized retelling of 2 real people. And I've always had hard times with that because you don't know what's true, you don't know what's made up. So I guess I should have known better, but when I picked this up I did not realize it was based on real people until I started reading it. That being said, I did TNS it because it was the most boring book that I have read in a very long time. I didn't like the fact that his story starts from the very beginning and goes all the way to the very end. Her perspective is all about on the very last day of his expedition and about everything that happens that day. So her perspective was really the most boring aspect of this book because it talks about the minute details of her day, and I found that really frustrating. I felt like the author could have done so many different things with the timeline. Instead, the author does that. I really didn't like the fact that there was this third wheel perspective of one of the other climbers, and that was just kind of out of place and unnecessary. Also, I did like the husband's perspective. I found it very interesting to kind of see what went into trying to climb the Everest and the trials that happened through it all. So, you know, it had that going, but overall I couldn't get into it. I didn't like the writing style that much. So I DNF'd it, and I'm not giving it a rating because I didn't really get that far, and I really don't know what I would rate it either. The last library book that I picked up was The Enchanted by Ren Denfield. This is narrated by one of the prisoners on death row, and he shares the stories of the lady who takes on lost causes from death row and tries to get them off, whether that is that their sentence is lowered to just a life sentence or they're able to leave prison completely. And she decides to take on the case of York, who has decided that he just wants to die. 30 pages into this book, and I knew that I was absolutely going to love it, and I actually bought the book right then and there. This book was written so beautifully, and it's amazing how well she was able to lift up such a dark and dismal story with her writing. It was just so wonderfully written and so magical in the sense because of the way the prisoner viewed the prison and the things that he would imagine in his mind. It was just a wonderfully written book that had a lot of depth, and there's just something that happens towards the end of the book, and when that does, I'm just like, what? Because you don't think that it's not something that you would ever have imagined. But the characters were really fleshed out. I loved all the characters. It's so hard to talk about this book because I loved it so much, and I loved it, you know, I just fell for it really hard. So that being said, I give it 5 stars. It's probably going to be my favorite book of the year. The next book that I picked up is And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini. This is the author who wrote The Kite Runner, and that was the book that I absolutely loved by him. And this is about Abdullah and his younger sister, Perry, who are everything to each other. The story starts in 1952 when their father does something that changes both of their lives drastically, and it goes from there. I love Hosseini's writing, and it's there in full force here. He's able to flesh out his characters and make them really real and beautiful, and I just loved that aspect of the story. What I didn't love was that each chapter is a different person's perspective, and we don't get Abdullah's perspective again, or we don't get Perry's until the very end, and so that was really frustrating. I get what he was trying to do, but I felt like he could have done it in a different way. He could have done so many different things with the timeline that I felt like this whole different person perspective each chapter took away what started out to be a really strong book. And that is because I felt that there was a disconnect to Abdullah and to Perry. I did notice it after I got into the second perspective because I quickly realized that I had no interest in those other people. If I had at least had some interest, I probably would have kept on going, but I didn't. And I read Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I was planning to read both that and Through the Looking Glass, but after I finished Alice's Adventures, I gave up. I love Lewis Carroll's writing, and the story overall was really great, and I would have loved it even more if Alice didn't exist at all. She was the most bratty, annoying kid ever, and the fact that it was told through her perspective really just took away my enjoyment of the story and of the book. And I knew that she got worse in the second one because, of course, like I didn't mention, this isn't like second time round for me reading this, and I just didn't want to endure her bratty, childish. And I know she's a kid, okay, but she's so bratty and so annoying. Yeah, there you go. I gave this 2 stars. I will be also giving this one away. So I tried to reread Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Margaret Manson. This is YA, and I had a feeling that in trying to read it, I wasn't going to like it, and I was right. It's very YA, it's very teenagey, and I don't like reading books that are targeted for the young adult group. So there it was. The first thing she does when when she meets Roger is, oh my gosh, he's so cute. Why am I dressed like this? I don't know. Maybe I'm just in a mood and I wasn't patient enough the second time around. But either way, it's not a book that I'm keeping. And you know, I've said this so many times before, I don't like YA and I don't want to read YA anymore. And the last book that I picked up was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is also a reread for me, and it's about 10 people who are lured to this island mansion, and one by one they get picked off. I think because this book is all about the mystery, just no other things going on to focus on, that it's not a book that you can reread and enjoy again as much as you did the first time, because you already know who did it. And so it's harder to enjoy it at the second time around, if that makes any sense. Also, in rereading it, I realized how much I do not like her writing style. I don't think I'll be picking up any more of her works because of that. I just think it's very bare bones, just straight out telling the story, plain and simple, and that's just not my thing. I also don't like the fact that she recaps things. Like, these characters were all talking about the letters that they were given, or rather that they were sent, and then the other character recapped everything that they had just talked about. And I was just like, really, we need a recap when we just heard all of this, like right then and there? So that was frustrating. It was actually a quite boring read. So there you go. I gave it 2 stars, and like I said, I am not going to be reading any more of her works again. Those were all the books that I've read and had to talk to you about. Tell me down below if you've read any of these. I would love to chat with you about your thoughts, and also what have you been reading recently. Thank you all so much for watching, and keep smiling.